why don't we go ahead and call the meeting to order. First item of business there has got our opening roll call. Have you roll call?
I have called the roll.
Here.
Thank you, Mike.
So the second item on there, we've got our, we got several sets of minutes. Guess we need to make a motion here.
Okay.
Okay, got a motion second, all in favor?
Aye.
That passed. So then go on to reports. First one up is financial reports.
Alan should proceed. I thought Gus was going to be giving a report, but he is not here. Really, you're not going to see a whole lot different this month. There was really no outstanding expenses or anything out of ordinary. The only thing I wanted to bring your attention to was on page 9, the monthly P&L. We actually managed to crest 400,000 in revenue this month, and our operating income just went over 110,000. Basically, that's all I have for you on the financials. Everything is pretty stable, and we're just continuing to conduct operations as normal. Any questions?
Hearing none. Continue.
Kim, Dave,
Yes.
would you like to give a report in lieu of Buzz?
Well, I'm not sure where Buzz is,
Spot,
but the Finance Committee reviewed the quarterly finances, and they look good, stable. Matter of fact, they may have been a record for revenues, not by much, but it looks stable. And there was something else we voted on, like for the life of me, I can't remember what it was.
Well, the committee did vote to approve moving forward with the engagement of the audit firm.
That's right. Yeah, that was primarily it.
So that would be the financial committee report?
Yeah, I don't think everything else is running pretty normal. That's about it.
But we did, management brought the finance committee members current on the recommendations from the Doug Dawson report that were reviewed last meeting and supported and approved for implementation with the board. So the finance committee is now fully current on the understanding, and will be working with management to monitor management and its success in implementation.
Okay. This is under discussion, I think that actually had approval of the 2016-17 budgets.
I'm sorry, Scott, where are you at?
Maybe
I'm not awake. That's actually a little further down in the agenda.
You missed.
The discussion and action.
Oh, did it change?
Just a tiny.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because we.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay. That was easy. All right, so with this agenda, we got manager's report.
Okay. I'm going to give a report for both our outside plant, our IT department, and our CSR sales department. For the outside plant, MINET has a new 21-unit apartment on Stadium Street in Monmouth. We are currently deploying the distribution fiber throughout the building. The team is also preparing for distribution fiber at a new subdivision in Monmouth called Sunset Lane. We are also preparing for a wireless play at the new amphitheater, and if required, expect to have it available at the first event that is there. Our IT department, the Core ISP remediation depends on completion of the environmental build. The build is now complete and currently being tested. Our expectation is that all ISP services, including DHCP and DNS and public email, will be fully off of the Blade system and active in the new environment before the end of July. My team knows me all too well, and I think this is cute. Definitions, if asked, here are concise statements. DHCP is Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, the client-server protocol that automatically provides an Internet Protocol IP host with its IP address and other related configure information. DNS is Domain Name System, a protocol establishing how computers exchange data on the internet. There's our IT lesson for today. CSR Sales Department, one of their CSRs, Sunny Dillon, has left the company to move to Salem. I think she's chasing the love of her life there, if I recall. Sunny was a hire made through Halo after she completed an internship through them with MINET. Certainly MINET has given her a good career start, and she's an Independence resident by the name of Ashley Baldwin has been hired in her place, and she starts tomorrow, which would be today. The CSRs are doing an excellent job of upselling customers from the current 30 megabytes for 40 to our new 50 for 50 product. In the month of May, there were 52 conversions from 30 to 50. So our strategy of not only making that the new available entry threshold, converting people, existing customers ahead of time to it is also working very, very well, which is going to generate the revenue that John's forecast. From May 1st to June 1st, we saw a net loss of 9 services sold. May is when Western Oregon University students begin leaving. The exodus accelerates in June, but we intend to manage the churn this year as well as we did last year. Charts showing account totals and reasons for service disconnections in May are available if so desired. Questions? Departmental reports?
You talked about good things with the CSRs. Now that we're nearly built out, we're nearly at maximum penetration. Is that, are we okay with the level of personnel we have in that? And what do they do once we're quote unquote sold as much as we're going to sell?
I think the head count answer to that question, that won't be dynamic. Currently, when a CSR is not on the front lines, they are on the phones with existing customers doing the call downs that Jason has repeatedly shared with you that we contact our customers about. If your question is, do we expect a reduction in CSRs? Quite frankly, I don't. I think the growth that we will be experiencing in some of our outreach projects, or reaching out projects, or bolt-on projects, whatever terminology we end up doing that, will consume any excess time that's generated because of our penetration levels. But when I say it's a dynamic environment, if we find that we have more CSR hours than we have need to properly utilize, we're not going to hang on to them, because we do have 2 or 3 that are running as part-time employees. 3, so that we bring their hours up and down as demand requires. I don't know if that answered all of your questions.
Yeah, it does. It just sort of struck me as you were talking about this, and then put that against the market penetration that we've determined to be, just about to the end of that. And I'm anticipating that there will be new opportunities for them should that direct sales not, no longer be as fertile as it once was. I don't know. I guess it would be nice if the skills that they had would be compatible with the sort of bolt-ons that we talked about, and whether those that could work. I'd say it with no agenda whatsoever. It just sort of struck me that if we're going to move away from new sales, of course, we got to maintain the accounts that we have, so the direction may change some. Yeah, okay.
Anything else, anybody? Okay. That does minute, then we need the discussion, action, the first item up there is strategic plan template.
I might suggest, Mr. Chairman, that we move that to the last item, because I think that that could get quite lengthy. And perhaps you want to get to your other items first, and then move into that, because they're a little more academic.
Yeah, okay. Is that good to everybody? I'm fine. So I'm gonna go down to engage the auditor. So what can you do with that?
This year, fiscal year 15-16, we have decided as management to move forward with using the same auditor that we have in the past years, as long as that is okay with the board. We feel that at this time, it's just not the right time to start looking for somebody new. That may be a consideration in the next couple of years, but this year it's just not the right time with all the changes that we're going through. So you have for you the engagement letter. If you guys would like to approve moving forward with engaging the auditor, we would be happy to accept that.
And I would just commentarily add that the Finance Committee discussed this matter at some length during its meeting. I think what is worthy of understanding and appreciating is what's the objective of the audit. In terms of financial statement audits, some of them are more, quote, just purely compliance oriented, meaning that there's a requirement of the company to have a financial statement audit, which in the case of MINET there is because of debt covenants. And in some cases, financial statement audits can also almost take on a management consulting value, because maybe the accounting firm has a deep-seated knowledge in the industry you operate in because of other clients, and can actually add other value beyond the pure compliance component. That's not the case here. I mean, the firm that MINET uses does a lot of governmental audits, and so they're good at the fact that MINET is an ORS 190 firm doing a compliance audit very efficiently and effectively, and they've been with the company for a long time, so they know the company very well. And with that goal in mind, to change an audit firm for that purpose right now would be very costly and distracting to the company. However, given the fact that the company is moving into new areas of business, which could change the objective and the goal of having an audit as the company moves forward, the Finance Committee decided in its deliberation in this matter on Tuesday that the best approach was to stay with this audit firm for this year for the reasons I just mentioned. And between now and sometime in the fall, winter period, we're going to continue to discuss this with the future of MINET in mind. And if in fact it makes sense to consider going out to bid for the next fiscal year audit because of some other compelling reasons beyond just being a compliance audit, then the Finance Committee committee agreed that it would work with management to pursue that path at that point in time, and obviously would keep the board abreast of it.
I think it's fair to say that there was I sensed an appetite at the Finance Committee that they would like to include our present auditor with a review of other available auditors at that time.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting discussion because there's the standards have gotten so intense with audit firms. There's frankly not much difference in the services because they have to follow these procedures. And then what you do get when you switch an auditor is you get to pay them to familiarize themselves with you.
Yes, you educate them.
Do the audit. So yeah, there's a transition cost. I've talked to a couple of cities that went through it recently and didn't enjoy it at all.
So with that in mind, the Finance Committee reviewed this, and they made a formal approval of the firm, approval of the engagement letter, and that was the Finance Committee's recommendation to the board to accept the firm and the engagement letter as presented.
Okay. So we can use a motion.
I'll move that we
Second.
Okay, got a motion and a second. Anything there? Nope. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes.
Thank you very much.
So the next one would be the budget approval. Is that okay right now, Marilyn?
Yeah.
So, budget approval.
The board is very familiar with the budget. You were all present at the budget committee meeting. As far as we're concerned, everything has been approved by the budget committee, and we will just hand it off to the board to approve as well.
And I can't remember procedurally. Are we approving what was given to us before? Because what I'm familiar with my city side, we do like a resolution appropriate and all that good stuff. I can't remember what format.
Well, again, just to remind the board, the MINET budget under the ORS 190 standards is not an appropriations budget like it would be for the cities. Yeah, it's a planning budget, and I will remind you, because I brought the minutes of the last MINET budget committee meeting, item number 6 in the minutes reads, Mike Lodge moved to approve the fiscal year 2016-17 MINET budget. Nancy Lodge seconded. The motion was passed unanimously.
Okay, so we're basically approving what we did in the budget.
You're just adopting it, that approval.
Correct. I did want to address one question that Mike had regarding the CPI and our COLA increases. I did do the research on that shortly after the budget committee meeting, and we have decided to go with CPIU, which I believe was a recommendation by one of the committee members. I can't remember which one. But basically that came out to being about 2.09%. So if the board is okay with it, that's what will be the COLA increases for this coming year.
Yeah, I think it's probably fine, just like the key things, you pick a benchmark. At the
Correct.
moment, that would be one of the higher benchmarks.
And that is for the western, specific to the western region. I looked at Seattle. It was actually significantly higher than that. And
There's actually Portland numbers. I don't know if you drill down to that.
I was unable to locate those in the Bureau of Labor and Statistics.
Okay, they're a lot easier to get.
Okay.
Those are nightmares to try to get through. Those are.
Gotcha.
I think we need to pick something, I guess, either ratify was in the budget. I wouldn't mind a further discussion on this, because there's a couple simple Portland ones that we can use that would track a little bit more accurately in our area.
Okay. I'm happy to look into that.
Yeah.
Would there be an advantage to utilizing the same index or the same benchmark that cities use? David, what do you use? Which one do you use?
We used an average of what other folks were doing, frankly. We ended up at 2.5% COLA this year, but we've fallen pretty far behind too, so in terms of the COLA adjustments in our budgets because of the restraints we put on it. So, but 2.5% was probably close to 2 to 2.5% was probably close to a typical city adjustment this year across the state.
And that's where Seattle was at. It was about 2.5%.
Yeah, because just interesting that the benchmark we used, which ended up on the low end, we were only 0.3 for ours. Yeah, and then even if you did the, I think the EU was like 1.1. Most things were sitting at 1.52.
I think you're right in terms of the benchmarks that are out there.
Yeah, but the key thing is we pick one and we go again, because they all fluctuate. It's amazing, even when you go monthly. If somebody's picking February, they do 2%. If they pick March, it could be 1%. But the idea is just to stick to one and try to use that. Or if you want to do some other system. So I guess the key thing is, so it's why don't we go ahead and just, as noted, that's in this year's, which is fine, and then both of us can maybe evolve this a little bit more.
So what I'm hearing from the board then is we're going to approve the budget as the budget's been constructed and presented, but management will follow up to take a further look at the CPI indices to see if there's one that can be even better fitted than the one John proposed. And if so, we'll bring it back to you, and then ultimately you will make a decision about what management should follow.
Yeah, we can just fit it in next year's budget.
Great.
So question, do we approve the budget or we adopt? Okay, will we adopt the 16-17 budget?
Okay.
I'll second.
Second, a motion second, anything else? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, pass.
Are we proactively bringing the COLA reconsideration back to you? Is that my understanding?
That's what I would do, I think, and if you want to benchmark things, I would put it like a couple months out before your budget process starts, just so we can get that set, and then you guys can integrate that in the your process.
Okay.
And those raises are gonna be occurring the first of this coming month. So are you guys okay with the 2.09%?
Yes.
For now?
Yeah, this is,
Okay.
that's fine for this.
Okay.
I'm looking at future, just let's take a look at benchmark for that.
Absolutely, we will.
You're good. That's right? Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Okay. Then the next one on there is we have the, it's cool title, Second Amendment to the Restatement of the MINET Intergovernmental Agreement. And this is a discussion that does anybody get a copy? We sent it out electronically. Does anybody?
It was sent electronically, and I
got it.
gave you a couple of
Yeah,
extras in
if you
case.
need it. So what this is.
I think David needs a copy.
So what this was, is it came up a while back when we were looking at finances, particularly, like what kind of products can we go out, where is it? And then we also started to look through and said, is there anything else that needs to be cleaned up? We had a committee out, Jerry and I sat down and looked, and we also thought that the secretary treasurer position we never used it the way it was set up in here. And then as we kind of went through in a couple levels, is like, you know what? One, we had the debt discussion in the 2010 refinancing agreement, standalone from the rest of the document. So you had two things, which is really dangerous when you have things sitting out there. And then by the time we got Chad Stokes, our attorney, lined up, and he said, let's just clean the whole thing up. And the nice thing is what we'll end up with, once we get this all approved, is a clean document. The clean document takes care of everything in one place. And to kind of go through, so I hit on a couple things also in the going through it, is that Chad says, well, why don't we just kind of modernize some of the language? At the time, a lot of the language was we will. Now we're past tense at this point, so let's just go ahead and work those through. So I want to walk you through just real quickly. On the first page, it just kind of updates where we are, because you're stacking all the prior agreements. So when you get down to we'll call it the red or the blue whereas, depending on what you have. It just documents, first document, second, third, it gets you up to the modern time, so you know this is a comprehensive. Under number 1, we add expansion, because that wasn't really envisioned in the past. Now we are having that discussion, and so that would allow that. If you go on to page 2, when you get down into kind of section 4, but you get into page 2, where Chad went with that was, back when we originally started, we used the term member, because there was a possibility at that point that we would allow other members to be integrated. At this point, it's obviously just the two cities. So I wouldn't really envision that. So what he did is he changed out all through the document going to city instead of member, because that's essentially what it really is and how it operates. Then likewise on page 3, you get to section number 6. The underline there was maintenance and expansion. So once again, it talks about taking care of the system, expanding the system. Way back when we talked about it, a lot of it was building the system. The original was, here's all the efforts to build the system, and it wasn't directly relating to just keeping it going and moving out. Next page after that, the same thing. He just kind of language changed. Instead of it referring to the board, just changed everything to the board, just to make that a little bit more direct wording. And then when you get into the next page, you get number 7, the officers. That's where we did do a shift, as we said, the board shall designate board members basically to keeping of records. So that got not to the point of the secretary treasurer supervising people and directly. So we can kind of more use kind of the system we've had right here. Number 9, that just kind of cleaned up just using ORS, because we are in ORS 90 for the contracting issues. And then if you keep going, a big block there was getting the indebtedness section from the other document and just bringing it into the new document. So now it's all in one place. And the strikeout there was the original. We just talked about state board. So at that point, that was all that we were really talking about. And then the rest of it's really just more cleanup, just using the city's word, for otherwise, and kind of moving forward from there. So the idea behind this is if the board could approve this, then we need to go back to the two cities, because the two cities are actually the signatories on this, and then they'd have to both agree to it.
I still saw a reference to that secretary treasurer position. Was the idea to leave it active but just specify that it's not responsible for the document keeping, or was it to remove it?
Well, I think the, let me see, because,
7A.
yeah, let me think about that. That's actually, that's a good question. I think his idea was that we kind of label it there, but then just made it broader down there, but it's, I mean, it's not as strict of a link.
I'm fine with leaving it and then just clarifying, basically how we operate today. I just was curious. Because the 5A it also still says that there should be one as well.
Go back to 5.
I had a question on paragraph 17, miscellaneous. It has to do with going to court. It says that we may go to court in Marion County.
Oh,
Is that an oops, or is that?
I don't know, that's good, because that's actually from the original document. No, that's a good question. That wouldn't seem to make any sense. Okay, so David flagged a couple questions. That is interesting, because we do call out secretary treasurer, and then we basically broaden the responsibilities, but it kind of softened it, just said it's someone.
Well, I mean, and like I said, I don't have a preference whether or not we keep that position. It just seemed, it made sense that we're specifying how it operates today. But I thought I remembered that the idea may have been just to eliminate that position as well.
Let me see here.
Well, we want to have some third-party position, I believe, in case we have the chair or vice chair absent.
You know, the interesting, I was just looking at wording, the easy way to get to that would be, just instead of, it says the board shall designate one or more individuals, just the board shall designate a secretary treasurer who shall be responsible for keeping the records. Then that way you would actually link back everything together.
Well, and I don't know that necessarily, 7E, I think, would fit that record either way. I just didn't know if under section 5, we still wanted to elect a secretary treasurer. I think it maybe makes sense to have 3 officers. The only thing is with the election of it in 5, there isn't anything else in the document that says what his role is. Whereas the vice president has, what's the role of vice president?
I wouldn't mind actually the tweak that I just kind of threw out. If we just said the board shall designate a secretary treasurer who shall be responsible, and you just use the rest of the word. And then that way, it's noted, and that tells you what they do. And
Would that conflict at all with 5A where it says the board shall elect from the secretary, president, vice president, secretary, treasurer?
No, because that just gives us the ability to elect that position. Let me see. I think we need to line it up, because you could almost argue that there's a secretary treasurer, then we've designated like somebody else that does these things.
And it may not be a bad idea to still have it designate.
How about we leave it, we'll flag it, I will contact Chad, and then just see if he can kind of work that. So it sounds like if we're going to keep a secretary treasurer position, we probably then should line that up. Or else I guess the other one is we strike the reference to secretary treasurer, we just have that 7E as a standalone.
Well, and I think that under 7E, it may be worthwhile to still say something around, if you keep the secretary or treasurer in there, say the secretary treasurer or their designee, you can still have that in there where it could be designated.
Okay, we had that as a discussion point, and then obviously Marion County, that's an interesting one too.
And under 6E, it says the board may establish and collect fees and charges for its services. Send me your bill.
You will? Whoa.
That would be doing different.
But that's kind of misleading. I mean, elsewhere it says uncompensated, but that's kind of not what that says.
I wonder if the purpose there was, David, where it says that pricing for MINET,
That's
and
what
be clarified that.
But that's in number D, or item D.
Subscriber rates. I think that deals with other things like, surface call, et cetera, all the other things you could have for charges.
Establish and collect fees and charges for its services.
All right, yeah.
6 years.
I agree. Yeah, 16.
Oh, okay.
Is that retroactive?
That's intriguing too.
Which one's that?
Oh, Maryland flag went under, almost to the end. So section, the new one would be 16, employment issues. And C reads that the cities, old members, agree to accept liability for personal benefits. Which isn't, so that's a good one too. So if it's okay with everybody, how about if I take those few questions, comments, work with Chad again, and get back into the draft for next time? All right, anything else? Right, thank you. So then, now we can go back to the strategic business plan.
Okay, does everyone have today's packet in hard copy?
Yeah.
Starts on page 8 in the packet.
Mark and I, Mark more so than I, but Mark and I have spent a great deal of time putting together what we understood to be our charge for pulling together a strategic/business plan forward-looking for MINET. Starting on page 8 and to the end of this document, I'm going to quickly go through a number of sections and definitions, and this is going to be a joint presentation between Mark and myself. But when we get to the end, I'm going to go through more specifically what is our current expectations on moving the strategic plan through the review and approval process. But before we get there, we're going to decide on, hopefully we're going to decide on the process we're going to get to. Now on page 8 and 9 of this document, you'll know you're in the right document if you have a burgundy line at the bottom.
Well, they don't. They have a black and white copy. I was cheap.
On page 8 and 9.
Mine has burgundy.
You're preferred. You don't get to send me a bill, just Greg does, because he's got black and white. As long ago as, I would say it was late fall, wasn't it, Mark, that we were actually already starting to put our heads around pulling together. At that time, we were calling it what we expected we would need as a 5-year runway to take MINET to the level that everybody wants it to have. And that is now only stability with its legacy products, that being voice, video, and data, with substantial market penetration. But to take it to the point where it can be self-supporting of the debt that it has. And we included page 8 and 9 because these were the options at that time that we thought should be discussed for MINET. One was a true exit strategy, to take this company apart and put it down. One was that we partner with an entity perhaps like Wave, where they essentially take over the operation, and we're accompanied by and large, by name only. And perhaps coming to an agreement where there's a portion of the debt that they would acquire in doing that. And the third was basically an organic or geographic business growth strategy. And that's what we had settled in on at the time. And this was after reviewing, having conversations with some very early individuals with MINET, Greg Ellis being one of them, the individual mayors of both cities. And that was to exploit the organic growth opportunities in the existing business model to continually increase the profitability and cash flow stream for the end game, creating MINET's financial capability to fully fund debt service and capital investments and requirements. With that in mind, retain the current data, cable TV, voice business services, and grow into new reachable geographics. Additionally, exploit new peripheral business opportunities, or the bolt-ons that we've been discussing over the last several months, that leverage from excess and available capacity within the MINET expansive fiber optic network, and the company's cutting-edge capabilities in data services and other strengths and core competencies. That evolved into through the last several meetings and through the budget process, and most specifically at the last budget meeting, or at the last board meeting, we were tasked with bringing back our recommendations as to a template for developing a strategic / business plan, what type to use, how to develop it, how to monitor it, and how to report on it to the board at this meeting. Is that not correct, Mark?
Could be correct.
So with that in mind, I'm going to have you go to page 10, then if you would. Mark, I'm going to have you kind of jump into this for a little bit, and I want to come back at the end and get into a lot of detail on the process that we'll go through.
Okay. And if I could just add before we jump into that, just one more comment on what Don shared with you about this. As we went through that assessment and evaluation process and ultimately concluded that MINET should, using my term, stay in the game and continue to play and operate and expand, that's what you can see. The culmination of that was us then researching, exploring, and attempting to exploit these new business opportunities, right? I mean, all of that culminated out of our conclusion that we should stay in the game and play, okay? And then as we move forward to embark upon those potential business opportunities, then we realized, well, to be most successful as a company and to provide the best benefit to the ownership of the company, i.e. the two cities, that we really needed to figure out how to develop a long-range blueprint or roadmap to help guide the entire organization, including the entire governance structure in that regard. So with that in mind, and then further conversation with the board, and at your request, we put this document together that is our proposed look at how we would, in essence, move forward in creating that blueprint and the process therefore.
Now, before we actually, let me inject one thing. One of the larger hurdles any successful CEO, general manager has is having responsibilities assigned to them without having the authority to execute them. It's almost a nightmare. It is MINET's hope and MINET's expectation that we get a clear consensus from the board today on how to proceed, that we are all in agreement with, so that we are proceeding without changing directions every board meeting. So if we can give it that time, that's our hope as a result of this. No, Mark, if you would. So
So,
we're calling it a planning process or developing this blueprint to get somewhere.
and this 13-page document I put together, I'll just move through certain parts and highlight what the intent was. I mean, I'm sure some of you have had the opportunity to read it. Yeah, I'm referring to it as a blueprint because that's really what we're trying to do is develop a blueprint like you would if in fact you were doing a major construction project to figure out how you're going to, build the outcome successfully. And that's what we're trying to do, figure out how to build the outcome of MINET's future successfully. And that's all I was trying to capture, just by reminding us all of that, I believe, on page 1. On page 2, Don and I went...
11.
Oh, I'm sorry. You must have it
Yeah.
embodied in a different document.
Well, we can't trust your imagination, can we?
Here's one for Mark if he wants to look at what
That's
we're all
fine.
looking.
Mine's just in its original form. So, excuse me a moment, please. Okay, so, now on page 11, Don and I then went through a process of sitting down and discussing, well, who needs to be participating in the process and who needs to be, in essence, driving, facilitating things. So you can see on page 11 the outline of our participants in the process. We're recommending that Don, as the CEO, to some comments he just made with my assistance, would facilitate the process. The primary participants in the development of this on a daily routine basis as we go through it, we're suggesting is in fact the management team, as is outlined there. And then we sat down to determine, well, who do we need as kind of sidelines, advisors, and counselors to, check things against as we're going through pieces of this process. And we kind of took a look at certain members of the finance committee based in fact upon their professional backgrounds and the kind of skill sets and experiences they had in terms of working with the organization, the committee, and we've identified 4 people that would like to, in that regard, use as what I'm calling a planning advisory council, meaning that, at various points in time as we go through certain segments of this, before we move to the next segment, we want to make sure that, the organization, or at least, getting input within the organization, that we're staying on the right track and getting, some kind of, input and check-in. And so we're proposing that those members of the finance committee work with us in that advisory basis. Doesn't mean that at certain points, and Don and I discussed this, and you'll see it further on this document, at certain points we will be checking within the full finance committee. But it's just not feasible in this process to kind of keep it working lean and effectively to try to pull that size group together all the time. So this is what we're proposing, and then ultimately the board's going to be involved in this. But again, as we bring things to the in this process to the finance committee as a first tier of filtering, if you will, for various aspects, then as it clears that filter, we would expect them to bring that to the board in terms of its input, feedback, etc., before we continue to move to further phases. Because what we don't want to do, and I've seen this happen in other situations, is management leads out on this. They get through a lot of the process before they really get the board interacting with them a lot. All of a sudden they spend a lot of time and effort, and they get to a certain point, and the board pushes back and says, well, no, that's not really exactly the path we're thinking the company should be on. So, I think taking these incremental steps and having these check-ins with various parts of the governance structure makes sense. And with that in mind, that's how we've identified this list of participants in the process.
And to that point, please remember that in addition to developing this plan and getting it implemented and then reporting it back to committees and boards on a regular basis, which I'm going to review in detail at the close of our presentation on this, the process that we expect to be going through that Mark just referred to, that we still have a legacy business to operate, voice, video, and data. And we still have to reach out and find new sources of revenue. So this is an add-on effort, so we don't want to We don't need practice doing this. We want to do it and make sure we're doing it as it fits your expectations along the way, so that we're not doing it again and again and again and again. Except to change it because we reviewed it at some point and said this isn't working. We're now on page 12.
We are, yeah, and please make this interactive, so as we're moving through this, if you have any questions or comments, please interject. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this page. I mean, this page is just kind of highlighting for us, and I'm trying to give you an example of, you know, how going through a process of this is kind of like somebody building a blueprint for what they're trying to construct, you know. And as you know, there are certain things, there are certain business opportunities, some that I have listed here on this page 12 that the company is embarking upon. And in essence, you know, this plan is trying to build an entire blueprint for the organization, how over the next 3 to 5 years it plans to successfully embark on those and ultimately change the company's future. So, I mean, you can read through that. I don't really think it's worthy to spend a whole lot of time on. However, one thing I do wanted to point out to you on page 13, and there's a section that says strategic plan versus business plan, because I'd like to impart to everybody, including everybody here, including me, that there is a difference between a strategic plan and a business plan. Okay, the strategic plan basically is that blueprint for the entire company, for the entire organization. A business plan is a business plan around one component of the organization. It could be, if you have, for example, multiple companies and a large consolidated company organization, a business plan could be around one of the companies within the organization. It could be around a service or product line within the company. So, and the business plans typically go into a lot more detail and actually are very action-oriented plans that give not only strategies but specific detailed tactics. So when we go through this process, what I envision is there will be a strategic plan for MINET, and within that strategic plan you'll also find a set of business plans. You'll find a business plan for the existing business, the business model that MINET operates today. And
much like we approved a budget without including any of the forecasted bolt-on revenues and expenditures into it, that would be separated out as a separate business plan.
Yeah, and then you'll find a business plan for the new opportunities in the aggregate and individually. So we will be using that terminology for a useful purpose.
Yeah, separate business plan for keeping the technology fresh at MINET for its existing customers and future customers.
So anyway,
Finish this there, Mark. I think a couple good things though, just even on 12, when you talk about new business opportunities, the new one with us is that we don't have like a specific person that does bolt-on sales. That's gone. You know, so in this whole mix of things, we could say, yeah, spend all your time on that and ignore the operation. Or you might not want to do that. But those are things that just get into a good balance. And I think where the strategic and business is good, because I think just like our sections at some point, yeah, the finance department will be recalibrate something, add a new option for online ordering or something, and then the tech guys are going to have their section. I think everybody's going to have a section that builds up in this.
Exactly.
So, you know, in a sense, we're looking to find an agreement among all of us, you know, on certain terminology, because so that we can say that we're referring to the strategic plan, which is the company as a whole, or we're referring to a specific business segment of the company and its associated operation or business plan for that segment.
So, you know, continuing on page 13 and on 14, you know, that's just an outline informationally of typically inherent benefits that come out of doing a process like this. That's why companies make the investment in a process like this, take the time and effort, because of the benefits that come out of it, so that, you know, companies aren't unintentionally and sometimes unknowingly trying to operate their business forward by making decisions shooting from the hip, so to speak. And I've seen it work with companies that have done that, and they have not, as a result, maximized their value as an organization as much as they could if they were a better planning organization, so.
That was a nice way of saying they failed.
Well, they didn't totally fail, they just didn't maximize
Succeed.
their total opportunities. So, in any case, what I've outlined on page 15 is that there in essence are, that section is entitled Common Types of Strategic Planning Models. There are different models or approaches, if you will, that companies will use based upon their type of business, their own internal operations, the external environments or markets that they operate in terms of what fits relative to what they want to achieve out of their planning processes. And typically, some of them will not use one of these totally, but they will take attributes of some of them and kind of
Hybrid.
make a hybrid out of it. And where I think MINET is quite frankly going to be is it's going to be a combination of a issues-based strategic planning process combined with the goals and objectives. Because, you know, there are some specific issues being that those new business opportunities that form the baseline and core of the future of the business. And then that's going to be combined with overall long-term goals and objectives. So this is more just informational in that there are different approaches. We recognize there are different models you can kind of pick up and say, well, we're going to take and use and adopt this model to our planning approach. And I think what you're going to find that the management team is going to employ here is going to combine with seeing what's called an issues-based planning process. And some companies, they deliberately use that. They will just say, okay, here's our list of issues that we've defined for the next 3 years. Let's build a blueprint or plan around those issues solely, right? And then you find some organizations that take a little bit different slant. They take a more general global look and they define their overall vision for a period of time, the mission of the value systems that come out of it, the goals and objectives, and then develop a planning process, but it may not specifically be earmarked at certain business, either issues or opportunities. And so I think that what you're going to find in our planning here is we're going to be combining probably elements of both of those that we think would be an appropriate fit for mine.
Yeah, just when I was reading that, that's where I ended up too.
Okay.
Because I think the idea is we want something comprehensive.
Right.
Even if the department's doing perfectly fine, there isn't any big initiative, but at least they're part of the organization that's there. We know we need to do that. It's just like, you know, we have to mow the grass in the parks, but there's nothing really strategic about that. But you need to mow the grass in the parks. That's part of the operation. So I think if we end up with those as a framework, and then, yeah, we're going to have more emphasis is obviously issues and what it's going to take to keep track of those.
Right.
And new things. So, yeah.
I think we'd like to walk out of here knowing that we have a good consensus, certainly if we do at MINET, that we would be issues-based with goals sliced in there. And I just gotta believe that is your expectation as well, what you said, Scott, but is that true of the rest of the board?
These are sort of boilerplate plans, you know, that all have unique benefits. MINET is an interesting company in that, you know, it's because of the nature, it's very dynamic, things are changing all the time, technological demands are increasing, in some cases falling by the wayside. We're backed by public debt. We are sort of landlocked in the traditional sense that we have been, with attempts to, and plans to break out. What do other firms, other industry elements of this type, what sort of planning do they use? I mean, is there anything unique about other quote-unquote high-tech firms? Because they're different than some of the examples that we have here.
Well, I'll answer it this way based on my experience in this industry. The approach that I instructed Mark, that I felt that we should take with this is, while we are a very unique breed of cat, there's just no question about it. Even unique within our industry, or kind of stand out there. But that there was no need to reinvent the wheel on this, that we can take the best of that's out there that applies to MINET. Now, specific to your question, John, in our industry, it always has tended to be an issues-based evaluation or process because of the dynamics of the business. It has to be, or it disappears. When we first threw up on the board, what are the basic types of plans? It was like, none of this means anything. We can go right here to the issues because we are small, we are dynamic.
I think it's good overall so far.
Okay.
I think I just throw in one comment. It was when I work with my councils, we do our goal setting, and I always have to emphasize that you can 95% of our operation is actually just showing up and doing operations. Because sometimes it's like, wow, look at all these great things, get on it. It's like, well, except the department head who's already working 50 hours a week now, there's their new goals and objectives and various things. And like when we built the police station, that was just tacked on to everything. Everybody's already busy in the first place, and so just we need to be aware of that.
So with considering those different, planning models in mind, I then kind of move forward to identify how I think the basic, and this is on the bottom of page 17, the basic strategic planning process, should work here. And some of the key steps, if you will, through the process that you can see. As example, number one, who will be involved in the process? I've already mentioned our recommendation in that regard. Determine if the focus of the plan will be issue-based or goals-based. We've kind of just recently talked about that, and we believe, it makes sense for MINET to kind of integrate the approaches to planning that comes out of those two planning types. On page 18, number 5, select a facilitator. In some large firms, they actually pay somebody who's a professional consultant, a planning consultant to come in, and that doesn't make sense here. And I think, given my experience and background in working with strategic planning companies and Don's background, that internally we can work together in that regard to fulfill that role. And the rest is going through various key steps that you do. I think, one of the things I would just focus on is number 10, because what I try to do is outline probably what I see as kind of the key components of that plan, if you will. As you can see there, the executive summary, the elevator pitch. And what I mean by that is I'm hopeful, well, actually I'm confident, that coming out of this process, there will be an elevator pitch or message statement about MINET as a company that would be embodied by the entire organization, including the governance structure, the city councils, and everybody else, so that when people are asking about MINET, this is the message that's being delivered, whether inside the organization, to other communities, relative to new business opportunities, et cetera, which is very important. Obviously, we'll go through and actually, I went back to the minutes of the board planning retreat in the spring of 2014. I'm sure many of you recall that because you participated in it. And there was discussion about vision and mission statements. So, we're going to start with those starting points because it's not that long ago.
Actually, that's not true. I think, Scott, you would have been the only one there that's active.
No, yeah, you were there. Yeah. And actually, David was there at the time, and
Disregard.
So anyway, then we'll obviously go things like that you would expect in the planning process, a SWOT analysis, which is basically going through a process of identifying the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats facing the organization that you want to take into consideration as you're going through and planning and looking out at its future. the goals and objectives setting, the strategies and tactics that arise out of that. And as I mentioned before, within the strategic planning structure, then we will be identifying what areas of the business need specific action or business plans as sub-plans within that, if you will, that are actionable plans that MINET will follow the management team to implement on. With that in mind, we'll also then be developing key performance indicators that come out of that, targeted customers and the business opportunities, and you can read through the rest of it. But those will be the components, and what I mentioned previously, that we'll have check-in points with what Don and I are referring to as the kind of planning advisory council of the finance committee and the board. We will be checking in with you folks on these because it's very valuable to be cautious and move forward, make sure everybody's on board with the things that management is working through before we, get you far down the track in the process. So, but that basically kind of gives you a brief outline of the components you would expect to see in the actual end product, if you will. And then on page, okay, go ahead, Don. Sure.
Then, we can talk this thing to death. But what's most relevant is that MINET finds its way in this world. Therefore, we need a plan, not just talked about, but put into effect, analyzed, evaluated, modified as needed. One of the things that I wanted to get to, and I'm sorry I'm going to back up just a little bit, it was the elevator pitch, is that how long have we been talking about having a unified message out in the public? If we have a plan in place that we're following, that's being evaluated, that's being modified as the environment changes, even those that choose deliberately not to sing to the same sheet of music will come along at some point in time. So if you would go to page 21 and 22, I'm going to go through this in a little more detail. The MINET management team intends to develop and process the strategic plan development through the review and approval process as follows. 1, the management team will begin the development stage of the process, identify the planning approach, develop a process timeline. I'll let you read on from there. Obviously, we're going to keep the various members and committees apprised. Upon completion of certain components of the strategic plan, the MINET management team will initially review and discuss those components with the Planning Advisory Council and with the board if it's warranted. Once the initial draft of the full strategic plan is complete, the MINET management team will review and discuss the assessment with the entire Financial Advisory Committee. Once the MINET Management and Financial Advisory Committee agree on the strategic plan and it's in its final draft form, MINET will then present and discuss it with the Board of Directors at a special strategic planning session. 5, when the strategic plan is board approved, the MINET management team will then begin the implementation and monitoring process. The management team will provide a quarterly report on the implementation of the strategic plan as it relates to the current fiscal year in place. A quarterly report will be provided to both the Financial Advisory Committee and the board. The Financial Advisory Committee and board, of course, will provide feedback, advice, and counsel to the management team and necessary follow-up. During the quarterly strategic plan reports and reviews and discussions with both the Financial Advisory Committee and the board, modifications to the plan may be based upon new information, changing circumstances both internally and externally, and potential new business opportunities may arise. And then 7, I want to remind you that the strategic planning will remain a living document. It will be reviewed both quarterly and annually and modified as changes are warranted and or desired. upcoming fiscal year, and the strategic plan will form the basis for the operational plans that drive the development of financial planning and budgets for that period of time. So if we're in agreement to the direction we should go, and if we're in agreement with our implementation process and then its reporting process and the ability to change it along the way, I would recommend that we have the appropriate discussion and get the consensus we need to get going. Because you've asked for this to be in place, or we've asked to take it at what point in October, I believe?
Yeah, the October, November timeframe.
Yeah.
Questions, comments?
Well, I really appreciate your comments, because when I first looked at this, I had some concerns because of the separation of business plan, strategic plan. But in fact, you've married them on page 18. You even said action plans, in parentheses, business plan. And that's kind of the way I, commonly look at a strategic plan and action plans. Right? And you're very, very specific on the business plan is the way you presented it. So that portion I like a lot. But when I first saw it, I thought those can be two separate things. Because I was on the private side for a long time, and they're different. Some of them can be different than strategic. So I like your explanation, and I like confirmation in this report.
Anybody else? Thinking?
I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, I'll throw out a couple. On the process, item number 2.
What page are you on, Scott?
On the 21. So that was the process, the number 2. I would encourage us to bring back some sort of bones to the board just to make sure that everybody's okay. What that can avoid is you go through the entire process, everybody's effort comes to the board, and the board goes, that isn't what we wanted.
Right.
So I think if you kind of like a framework, what it looks like, kind of where the roof thing is, I definitely would bring that to the board and say, hey, are we on track?
Okay.
Just avoid some time.
Yeah, I think I indicated it, or we would, but I think once the management team and, I mean, this is the process. What I'll do is then kind of for the management team, develop a work outline. It'll say, okay, and over this time frame, we anticipate working on and achieving these components of the process. And then when we have that outline, we'll give that to you so that in finance committee, so you can know that this is kind of our timeline and action, our work plan to accomplish these pieces, and you can expect for us to bring those to you for a check-in.
And I used to throw that back because I've been involved in a couple of different sides and processes that everybody puts a ton of effort into, and then it thumps when it gets to the board.
Well taken.
Like I throw out my facetious, I could have this awesome plan to sell Main Street Park. And when I bring that to the council, they'll look at me and say no, and then we'll move on. Nice waste of a bunch of time.
Right, no.
I think the nice one though is when you get back to all the details, it's going to be really helpful because right now if we have an overall goal of making more money, and then somebody says, well, what's that mean? We can go, oh, well, here's what we're going to do. We've got this opportunity here. We're going to squeeze this. We're going to adjust something. And we can tell people what we're doing.
One of the things, the SWOT analysis, when was that going to be done? Who do you anticipate doing that?
Well, that will be early on in the process. Typically, that's when you do the SWOT analysis, because what the outcome of the SWOT analysis are considerations or drivers that you take forward to the planning process in itself. And so the SWOT analysis is the key component that once management goes through that and believes that it's done a SWOT analysis it's satisfied with, that's when it'll check in first with the, it'll use the planning council for input, the finance committee, check with the finance committee, and check with the board as well, because unless there's total agreement on everybody's view of that, everybody's view of that, that's kind of a stopping point, because if everybody doesn't embrace that fairly universally in the organization and governance structure, then you run the risk of moving forward in your planning on things that are not in concert. So yeah, it'll be early in the process.
And staff will do that?
Initially, yeah, we will go through that, but then we will, check in with both the finance committee and the board to get their input and an ultimate buy-in and support, right?
Yeah, I think that'd be good. And then what I thought about with the external, which gets to the entire market out there, is
Yeah.
either like a Doug Dawson, and either what we got from the prior reports enough, or do you want to do just a little check-in with him just so he can, I mean,
Sure.
we got a lot of that from the report we just got, but that would get to, Cable's imploding. That's an external issue that is there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're suggesting that it might be useful to use Doug as a resource because of his industry background, yes. I think, I don't want to speak on behalf of Don, but,
We've already had that conversation, quite frankly.
yeah.
Okay.
You referenced it just now, Mark, but who is the Planning Advisory Council? That term came up and I went back.
Well,
I
okay,
couldn't reference it anymore.
John, if you refer to page
11,
thank you, John.
middle of the page.
Yeah, as I indicated, we wanted to have,
Finance committee.
we wanted to have.
Oh, Finance Committee.
Yeah, there you go,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then, on number 5, in terms of making sure that we have expectations set properly for everyone, on number 5, you're talking about the management team will provide a quarterly report on the implementation of the strategic plan as it relates to the current fiscal year in place. I'm just wondering what that would look like. I mean,
Well,
because some of the things are farther outreach. I mean, I don't want to, there may not be a real dramatic report during that quarter on the strategic plan development.
well, so typically what happens is in the strategic plan, a company puts together it's a multi-year plan.
Yeah.
For some companies, it's 3 years, for some companies, for many companies, it's 5 years, and,
Some even 7.
yeah, right.
Did you guys have a benchmark right at this point?
Well, it's going to be between 3 and 5. And I think that'll be better understood as we go through it, because, the risk you run in trying to plan out too far if the environment that you're operating in is very dynamic right now, is that, the information out that many years and what you can try to predict about what's going on today, it becomes less valuable. So, but typically, John, what happens, even if it's 3 years, so what happens is you end up with a 3-year plan. Year 1 of that plan becomes your operating plan, or management's operating plan, that it then operates by. So for example, let's say that we do the planning process now, and year 1 of the strategic plan is minus fiscal 2016-17, which begins July 1 of 2017. That 12-month period is year 1 of the plan, and what I'm referring to here is that we're implementing that plan in year 1, and we would be bringing you a quarterly report on MINET's progress implementing those things we've identified in year 1 of the strategic plan.
They're
to the board.
segmented into year 1.
Yeah,
Got
yeah,
it.
yep.
So you're not looking year 5.
No. And then also that operational plan in year 1 serves as the key driver for the financial planning and the budgeting for that.
For the following.
Yes.
The quarterly look at that as real-time report, where we're at.
Yeah, and I think it's good and it's great that you're doing that. I just wanted to be comfortable that you weren't setting too high a bar, that it's going to be pretty hard to report quarterly on a 5-year
No.
outreach, and you
No.
explained it just right.
Other folks?
I'd like to see the finance committee include the city representatives as well. The full finance committee.
Well, we did say we were going to, it says in here we're going to bring it to the full finance committee, right?
When you eliminate the city representative planning committee.
Well, I think we're recommending on the planning committee that it only include a subset, and then my recommendation is because of the nature of those people's professional backgrounds. And the fact that it's hard enough just to get, that size group together on a regularly scheduled basis, and this group would be on a real ad hoc kind of on-call basis. So that was the basis for our recommendation.
That's our discussion.
Right.
Paul, should they throw out a different suggestion?
Well, it comes back to the full finance that we did.
Yes, it does, right.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
Well, there's certainly an advantage to having a sort of a nimble planning advisory council. You know, and so I appreciate that particular part of it. And I think just from my own perspective, I would probably go with nimble rather than, I would understand the same concept. Well, the cities have got to have they need to have a stake in the game here, a voice a little more quickly. But I'm not sure how, I don't think that's more, personally, I don't think that's more important than the nimble nature of this, is to your point, Mark, about communicating with a smaller group is far easier. So I'm okay with the structure.
Anything else? Otherwise, it sounds like we're in pretty good consensus that this looks good overall. Do you guys feel directed?
I do.
Okay. Proceed.
Then back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I guess there's nothing really on there, but is there any other business? Hearing none, motion to adjourn. Wait a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Adjourned.